I thank the gentleman for yielding. I also oppose the Cicilline amendment as it is infinitely regressive. If we are to list out everything that would be disqualifying for someone, we, as Mr. McClintock mentioned, would have to list murder and battery and armed robbery and all the other things that are taking place in all of the Democrat-run cities and states that have defunded police and are continuing to see violence rise. So rather than listing every offense, I think the underlying amendment is sufficient to allow the chair to be able to make a judgment about who could be designated to lead the pledge, and the amendment would be unnecessary and superfluous and regressive. I yield back to the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman in the time I have remaining. That does remind me that most of the members, at least the members who served on this committee in the last Congress, were on record at some point saying they wanted to defund the police, and that seems a pretty subversive thing. And I read into the record on more than one occasion in this committee their actual statements to that point. So again, don't need to go down this trail. We're overly politicizing something. I oppose this amendment, and I think it is obvious to everybody what this is about. It's unfortunate. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? Gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. McBath, is recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I just have to say I really take offense to the comments that were just made about individuals on this side of the aisle that actually have worked or tried to defund the police, you know, or just are not in support of the United States and the flag. That is extremely offensive. And I know for a fact Democrats have spent as much time and effort as the Republicans trying to make sure that we are securing all the resources that we possibly can for our law enforcement. We support law enforcement. So I really take great offense to the comments that are made, and I hope that you will gingerly, going forward, not try to just make those kinds of broad statements about my colleagues on this side of the aisle, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hunt.
I would yield my remaining time to Ms. McBath.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you yielding to me, my colleague from California. And I'd just like to say to my Republican colleague, you know, to make a blanket accusation that others in this room have no relative experience with violence or gun violence other than you is definitely very premature. Since my son was murdered in 2012, I have spent every day, every hour, as many individuals in this room have, many of our experts, many of our survivors, many of the people that are sitting in this room working on this issue have far more, granted, probably have far more experience and relative knowledge about what it is going to take to change the culture of gun violence in this country. And we actively work on it every single day. So I really take offense to the language and to what you said, and I would hope that you would just think more candidly about the remarks that you make going forward, because as a survivor, I am very, very, I'll just say very disgusted by that remark. Thank you.
Yield back.
Without objection, the gentlewoman from Georgia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. I rise today once again and again and again and again because our children are being murdered in their classrooms. This is outrageous and it's unconscionable. Why have we not made good on our promise to our nation, our promise that our kids can laugh and learn and play in their schools without the fear of a shootout? We should not need sandbags in our schools to protect our children. They should not be forced to live in a war zone where bullets may murder a classmate at a moment's notice. What will it take? How much blood must be spilt? How many kids must be killed until we do the right thing? We are here to protect our communities, and Congress has lost its way. We've lost our soul, and we must do better than this. Weapons of war don't belong in our streets or our classrooms.
Ms. McBath. Yes. Still hit it.
Thank you, Chairman Owens and Ranking Member Wilson, and thank you so much to our witnesses today for your expert testimony. I must say it's a little bit disappointing to me to see my Republican colleagues kind of double down on their commitment to preventing working families from really getting the support that they deserve. Our Republican colleagues have no problem using PPP loans and other taxpayer dollars for their own business ventures, but sing a different tune when they see nurses and teachers that are actually struggling to pay even the interest on their principal loans. There are over 122,000 real people in my district in Georgia that qualify for some sort of student debt relief, and more than 80,000 who applied for these funds or were automatically approved and are counting on them to come through to assist them in handling the increased cost of their college educations. One of the most obvious factors contributing to these rising costs and the amount of debt held by our students is the trend of decreased public investment in our higher education systems. Nowhere can we find a better example of this than in my home state of Georgia, where the average debt per borrower is the third highest in the nation at over $41,000. At the beginning of the pandemic, the University System of Georgia, also known as USG, sustained a 10% cost cut of roughly $230 million that was never restored. The state recently went even further and cut an additional $66 million from next year's budget, specifically dedicated to USG. I've met with many different university officials, and they continue to express the concerns about what these cuts mean for their ability to retain and recruit staff, serve in-state students, and avoid having to increase tuition, which they have been very clear that they do not want to be forced to do. Sonny Perdue, the former Trump administration Secretary of Agriculture and current Chancellor of USG, was open about this decision and the negative impact that it will have on families in Georgia. And I quote him, he says, "This is an incredibly disappointing outcome. It will have a significant impact on institutions and the services that students and families depend on to advance their prosperity and help Georgia succeed," end quote. USG's recent press release, which I have right here, included a table showing the direct impact that these cuts would have on state funds of our universities. And I'd like to also, if Chairman, I may enter this into the record. It shows almost a $12 million cut from the University of Georgia, an $11 million cut for Georgia Tech, and over $8 million cut for the largest public university in Georgia, Georgia State University, and a $1.6 million cut for Georgia Gwinnett College, which is actually housed in my district. These continued cuts will negatively force schools to make up the revenue elsewhere or be forced to raise prices even further for students and families. My colleagues claim that the American people are fiscally irresponsible, but those are not the Georgians that I know and that I represent. The fact of the matter for most Americans is that the only way to afford school is to take out a loan, which I'm sure many of my colleagues here in Congress have actually had to do. We tell people every day that one of the best ways to get ahead is to get an education, and then we're now punishing them for trying to partake in the very thing that we want them to be doing, obtaining the skills that are necessary and vital to move their families and our country forward. Mr. Qual, can you discuss the negative impact that decreased public investment and continued cuts to higher education budgets have on our students and our public universities?
Thank you. I appreciate learning a little more about how state budget cuts are affecting your constituents, and unfortunately, it is not an uncommon story. We have seen for decades now states cutting funding for public higher education, particularly during recessions, and not putting the money back, and that has been the single biggest factor in rising tuitions at public colleges and universities, with particularly large increases in borrowing during the Great Recession.
Thank you, and I yield.
Gentleman from Oregon yields back. The gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, Secretary Mayorkas. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate your patience and your testimony. Mr. Secretary, as you know, DHS is responsible for the public safety of the United States of America, and the men and the women at DHS work very hard every day so that Americans can pursue the freedoms of their everyday lives. And the mission of DHS is somewhat ubiquitous, be it at airports or disaster sites, that many overlook the fact that much of it is the same federal agency. In addition to these crucial areas, DHS has also been active in combating America's gun violence epidemic, which of course I am extremely invested in. It's an issue that is very important to me, as many other survivors around the country as well. Studies have shown that between 70 to 90% of weapons recovered from crime scenes in Mexico can be traced back to the United States of America. With weapons of war commercially available at low levels of individual scrutiny, gun traffickers have been taking immense advantage of our nation's gun laws, which are very lax, to arm drug cartels that also fuel a lot of organized crime. In addition, we have seen that payment for these gun traffickers has at times resulted in opioids that have helped our communities be torn apart as well. DHS has been swiftly, as you have mentioned over and over again today, combating these kind of illicit dealings through its joint efforts with the ATF-led Operation Southbound. Mr. Secretary, DHS has taken a collaborative approach with the ATF-led Operation Southbound. Can you tell us just a little bit more about this operation? I believe a lot of people don't really know that it exists, and DHS's role in it. We'd like to hear about that and the results of this operation.
Congressman, one of the concerns that law enforcement has is that the firearms that are in the hands of the transnational criminal organizations to the south of our border actually emanated from the United States. And we, in the Department of Homeland Security, through our Homeland Security investigations, working in collaboration, as you have noted, with other federal agencies, are conducting operations to interdict the flow of firearms outside from within the United States, external countries, and to prevent them from reaching the hands of criminals. And I would be very pleased, given the law enforcement sensitivity of the operations, to provide you with greater details about how we are accomplishing that objective.
Thank you so much. And with weapons of war, such as high-capacity automatic firearms, easily available in far greater quantities in the United States than ever before, can you illustrate how these firearms trafficking contributes to organized crime and gun violence in the United States?
Well, the trafficking in the guns themselves is a criminal activity that is a for-profit activity. So when the criminal organizations gain greater profits, they only tragically expand their criminality. In addition, the transnational criminal organizations that receive the weaponry from the United States conduct violent acts that impact individuals who seek to enter the United States, as well as Americans themselves.
Thank you. And can you tell us a little bit more about how the export of these weapons of war directly relate to the opioid crisis in our communities in the United States?
It is the criminality of these organizations is inextricably intertwined with one another. They conduct their operations by protecting themselves and addressing law enforcement through criminal means, and that includes violent acts. And those violent acts are perpetrated with firearms, and sometimes those firearms originate from the United States. It is a web of criminality, and we are unrelenting in our efforts to disrupt and dismantle every aspect of that criminality. I'm intensely proud of the men and women who dedicate their lives to that effort in the Department of Homeland Security and throughout our law enforcement partner community.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate your dedication and those that serve right along with you in this manner. We really appreciate you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back.
Thank you. I would now like to recognize Ms. McBath.
Well, thank you so much, Chairman Owens and Ranking Member Scott, and also thank you to your staff and to our witnesses for being here with us today and making this hearing possible. And Ms. Burdette, once again, thank you so much for your witness and testimony. I heard your testimony last week in another committee. Acts or expression of hatred, racism, and anti-Semitism have no legitimate place in our society or on a college campus. And I'm glad to see that the Higher Education Subcommittee today coming together for this important discussion. Students will tell you that they are feeling unsafe, as we have heard today. And in volumes, we have heard this. And we have a responsibility to them to do everything that we can to foster communities of understanding, safety, and respect for each other on our college campuses. While the brutal terrorist attacks by Hamas on Israeli civilians on October 7th have incited a recent larger wave of anti-Semitism on campus and elsewhere around the country, this is not an entirely new development. This rise in hate is well documented by groups such as the Anti-Defamation League and is unfortunately becoming more and more normalized. In 2022, ADL documented almost 3,700 separate anti-Semitic incidents throughout the United States in just their yearly audit. This translates to over 10 anti-Semitic incidents a day in 2022, a 36% increase in the amount from the year before, and the highest number recorded since ADL began tracking anti-Semitic incidents in the late 1970s. Something is seriously wrong when in the last 5 annual reports by ADL, 3 of them have reported the highest number of anti-Semitic incidents recorded in the 50-plus years that this data has been collected. My community in Metro Atlanta, I represent Georgia, is no stranger to these incidents. It should never be considered normal, but it occurs far too often. A few years ago, I myself participated in a joint press conference with interfaith leaders in my community, local law enforcement, the ADL, and the Council General of Israel to the southeast to condemn anti-Semitic vandalism that was happening in our neighborhoods. And just over 2 weeks ago, anti-Semitic messages were displayed on an overpass above I-75 in my county, Cobb County, a home to one of the largest Jewish communities in the Deep South. And I am pleased that the Biden administration is responding with their release of the national strategy to counter anti-Semitism earlier this year. And as you stated in your testimony, and I quote, "The strategy's launch in May of 2023 was the most ambitious, far-reaching action in U.S. history. Also historic is the coming together, both from within and outside of the Jewish community, a kind of civic unity and resolve to tackle anti-Semitism through concrete, coordinated action to stop the spread and the normalization of anti-Semitism." And that is your quote, Ms. Burdette. Ms. Burdette, I wholeheartedly agree with you that this was an important step, and you've been talking about that today over and over again, about the importance of us supporting the Biden administration's actions and strategic action and work that they've done on anti-Semitism. But can you also discuss further, because I apologize, I've had to run in and out to other committees as well, can you discuss further some of the other actions that the federal government can and should be taking in response to these very disturbing rises in anti-Semitism on campuses specifically?
So, Congresswoman, the kind of action you described, standing with other faith leaders, that matters. When President George W. Bush called on America not to take out their anger about the tragedy of 9/11 on their Muslim neighbors, people listened. And the Department of Education officials, the president, the vice president, and officials across all of the agencies are talking more to Jewish people. They are listening, they are elevating their stories, and they are standing next to them. Your microphone is, aside from your checkbook, which I've already said is very important, your microphone is an incredible tool. And when people fight about Israel in the public debate, Jews get hurt. And when, as we've heard today, we talk about immigrants as potential invaders who would come here and act like Hamas, hate incidents against people who look like immigrants are going to go up. And that is no comfort to the Jewish community. So words matter and your microphone matters. And thank you for your work.
Well, thank you so much, amount of time, and thank you, all of you, for your witness and testimony.
Ms. McBath, you're recognized.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Fox, Ranking Member Scott, to our staff, and thank you so much to our witnesses today. And it is not lost on me that the intellect, the intelligence that we have on this panel today, the most intelligent minds that are leading our highest institutions are women. So thank you so very much. I had the privilege of attending a very similar hearing in the Higher Education Subcommittee just a few weeks ago, and I'm glad to see that we're continuing this conversation at a full committee level. Acts or expressions of anti-Semitism have no place in our society, and definitely not on any college campus or institution here in the United States. And what we must all understand is that this is not just the Jewish community's struggle. This is all of our struggle, and the Jewish community does not get to bear this burden alone. It is up to all of us to learn more and stand in solidarity against hate in our daily lives to ensure that the violence and the tragedies that follow unchecked, hatred will never be allowed to repeat themselves. I lost my son to that very hatred, so I understand it in my core. Similar to other expressions of racial and religious hatred, all freedom-loving people, all those who truly believe in the ideals that this country was founded on and continue to strive towards, must stand together in the face of this disturbing increase in hate across the country and across the world. An outpouring of support for the Jewish community and public condemnation of these heinous acts by interfaith and community leaders and elected officials in all backgrounds is the exact type of action that we need to take to confront this form of radical evil. Unity in the face of intimidation is how we are effectively going to resist hate in all of its forms. These actions seek to divide and intimidate us. We must show that we will not be intimidated, that we will not falter when our neighbors need us the most, that we are united against hate and we choose to love instead, irregardless of our political ideologies or our ethnic differences. As Dr. King once said, and I quote, "Returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." My community in metropolitan Atlanta is home to the largest community in the Deep South, the largest Jewish community in the Deep South. And it is no stranger to these incidents of anti-Semitism. I recall participating in a press conference with interfaith leaders, our local law enforcement, and elected officials, the Anti-Defamation League, and the Council General of Israel to the southeast to condemn the appearance of anti-Semitic vandalism and white supremacist symbols that were definitely expressed in our neighborhoods and our communities. While the reason for our gathering was very somber, it was uplifting to see so many different people from so many different faiths and backgrounds all come together to make it clear that this is antithetical to what our community and our society stands for. Dr. Nadel, I've had you before me before, and it's good to see you again. Can you please discuss some of the schools or the communities that have built strong interracial and interreligious connections and relationships in the aftermath of a racist or anti-Semitic incident, and what building those connections looks like and why they're so critical and imperative to healing?
So first of all, thank you. It's wonderful to see you again. What really stands out is how, at the personal level, change can happen. So, for example, at the University of California at Berkeley, which is a campus that has been roiled, as these campuses have also been roiled, a professor of Israel Studies and a faculty member from Middle Eastern Studies sent a joint letter pleading with the campus to speak in a civil tone. These are two faculty members who do not agree politically on what has been going on, but they got together to write this, and then it was sent out to the entire community. It is those kinds of actions that we need to be applauding, and we need to be elevating and uplifting, and as I said before, they just don't tend to make headlines.
Thank you so very much, and I yield back.